The voicemail arrived at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night in October 2007, crackling through the static of an old answering machine in Adam Hensley's cramped apartment above the hardware store. He was dead asleep when the red light blinked to life, casting eerie shadows across his bedroom wall. "Hey, it's me," Claire's voice whispered through the darkness, tired but strangely resolute. "I know it's late, but I think I figured it out. I'll tell you everything tomorrow. Love, you." Those would be the last words Adam ever heard from his sister. Claire Hensley was the kind of person who made lists for her lists, who color-coded her lesson plans, and who had never missed a day of work in her 6 years teaching piano at the Bridgeville Music Conservatory. At 28, she lived alone in a tidy apartment on Maple Street, where she kept her mother's china displayed in a glass cabinet and watered her plants with religious devotion every Thursday morning. Which is why, when she didn't show up to teach little Emma Rodriguez her 3 p.m. lesson the next day, the conservatory director, Margaret Thornfield, knew something was terribly wrong. Margaret had been running the conservatory for 32 years, and she prided herself on reading people. Claire wasn't just reliable, she was predictable to a fault. The young woman arrived at 7:30 every morning, unlocked practice room B4 with the upright piano that had a slightly sharp middle C, and spent an hour working through batch inventions. Before her students arrived, she was like clockwork, Margaret would tell the police later, wringing her hands nervously. Even when she had that terrible flu last winter, she called 2 days ahead to arrange substitutes. Claire didn't just disappear, but disappear she had. Detective Ray Kowalski found Claire's silver Honda Civic parked in the conservatory's gravel lot at 4:17 p.m. that Wednesday, keys dangling from the ignition, wallet tucked neatly in the cup holder, and her phone sitting on the passenger seat with 17 missed calls from worried students and their parents. The car doors were unlocked, the windows down, as if she'd just stepped out for a moment and planned to return. Inside the conservatory, her lesson books were stacked on the piano bench in practice room B4, pencil marks still fresh on the Chopin Nocturne she'd been preparing for the fall recital. Her coffee mug, a chipped blue ceramic piece with "World's Best Sister," painted in fading gold letters, sat half empty on the windowsill, still warm to the touch. Detective Kowalski had been working missing persons cases for 15 years, but Claire's disappearance unsettled him in ways he couldn't quite articulate. There was something too clean about it, too carefully staged. In his experience, when people vanished voluntarily, they left chaos behind: unpaid bills, incomplete projects, relationships in turmoil. But Claire's life appeared to have been put on pause, as if she'd simply stepped out of it mid-sentence. Adam arrived at the police station at 6:30 that evening, his face pale and drawn, still wearing his work clothes from the construction site, where he'd been installing drywall when Margaret's call came through. At 31, he was 3 years older than Claire, but he'd always felt like her protector, especially after their parents died in a car accident when Claire was just 19. "She left me a voicemail," he told Detective Kowalski, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "Last night, around midnight. She said she'd figured something out, that she'd tell me everything today." "Figured what out?" Adam shook his head helplessly. "I don't know. She'd been different lately. Distracted. Said she was hearing things at work, noises in the walls. I thought maybe she was just stressed about the recital coming up." Detective Kowalski made notes in his weathered notebook. "What kind of noises? Scratching sounds? Footsteps when she was there late. She even asked Margaret about it, but Margaret said the building was old, probably just mice or settling beams." Adam's hands trembled slightly as he spoke. "Claire wasn't the type to imagine things, Detective. She was the most rational person I knew." The investigation began in earnest the next morning. Officer Sarah Chun, a recent transfer from Portland, who specialized in missing persons cases, joined Detective Kowalski in canvassing the conservatory. Built in 1923, the three-story brick building housed 23 practice rooms, a small concert hall, and Margaret's office on the third floor. The basement held storage rooms filled with old instruments, sheet music, and decades of accumulated clutter. "Tell me about Claire's routine," Officer Chun asked Margaret as they walked through the echoing corridors. "Did she ever stay late? Work weekends?" Margaret nodded, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun that made her look older than her 58 years. "Oh yes, especially lately. She'd been preparing for the fall recital, working with some of our more advanced students. She had keys to the building, trusted access. Sometimes I'd find her here on Sundays, practicing in room B4. Always room B4? She had a particular fondness for that piano. Said it had character, despite the tuning issues. It was donated by the Pemberton family back in 1961, a beautiful upright with ivory keys and detailed woodwork." Margaret's voice carried a note of pride. Claire spent hours trying to coax the best sound out of it. Officer Chun made notes about the piano, while Detective Kowalski examined the practice room more carefully. The space was cramped, barely large enough for the piano bench and a small music stand. Windows faced the town square, offering a view of the old courthouse and the elm trees that were just beginning to turn gold in the autumn light. "These walls," Detective Kowalski said, running his hand along the paneling behind the piano. "They're not original to the building." Margaret looked surprised. "No, that's right. We had some renovations done in the 1980s, added soundproofing to some of the practice rooms." "Why?" "Just curious." He tapped the wall with his knuckles, listening to the hollow sound it made. "Your building maintenance records, do you keep them?" "In the basement, though I'm not sure how complete they are." While Detective Kowalski disappeared into the dusty basement archives, Officer Chun interviewed Claire's students and their parents. She spoke with 12-year-old Emma Rodriguez, whose mother, Carmen, had been the first to notice Claire's absence. "Miss Claire was the best piano teacher," Emma said, her dark eyes serious behind wire-rimmed glasses. "She made me practice scales, but she also taught me how to play with feeling. She said music wasn't just about the notes, it was about the story you're trying to tell." Carmen Rodriguez, a nurse at Bridgeville General Hospital, had picked up Emma from dozens of lessons over the past 2 years. "Claire was always so punctual," she told Officer Chun. "But the last few weeks, she seemed preoccupied. During Emma's lesson 2 weeks ago, she kept looking toward the wall behind the piano. When I asked if everything was okay, she just smiled and said the building had a lot of history." "Did she seem frightened?" "Not frightened exactly. More like curious, like she was trying to solve a puzzle." Officer Chun's next interview was with Timothy Crane, a 17-year-old who'd been taking lessons with Claire for 3 years. Tim was preparing for his college auditions, and Claire had been working with him on a challenging Rachmaninoff piece. "She was totally focused on helping me with my technique," Tim said, his voice cracking slightly. "But last week, during my lesson, she stopped in the middle of giving me feedback and just listened. She told me to keep playing, but I could tell she wasn't really hearing my music anymore. She was listening to something else." "What kind of something else?" Tim shrugged uncomfortably. "I don't know. She said she thought she heard someone moving around upstairs, but Mrs. Thornfield was already gone for the day, and we were the only ones in the building." The pattern emerged slowly through a dozen interviews. Over the past month, Claire had become increasingly aware of sounds in the conservatory, sounds that didn't match the normal creaking and settling of an old building. She'd mentioned it to several people, but always in passing, never making a big deal of it. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the conservatory's piano tuner who came monthly to service the instruments, provided another piece of the puzzle. Claire called me. 3 weeks ago, she told Officer Chun. Said the upright in room B4 was making strange noises, even when no one was playing it. I came out to look at it, but couldn't find anything wrong. The soundboard was solid. The strings were properly tensioned. I told her maybe it was just atmospheric pressure changes affecting the wood. But you didn't hear the noises yourself? No, but ... Dr. Walsh hesitated. When I was working on the piano, I did notice something odd. The back panel seemed to have been removed recently. There were fresh scratches around the screws, and the wood stain was slightly different, or someone had touched it. I asked Claire about it, but she seemed as puzzled as I was. Detective Kowalski emerged from the basement archives covered in dust and carrying a thick folder of maintenance records. Interesting reading, he told Officer Chun. According to these documents, the conservatory underwent major renovations in 1983 and 1984. They added soundproofing to all the practice rooms, updated the electrical system, and modified the layout on the second floor. What kind of modifications? They sealed off several rooms that were deemed structurally unsound, created new storage spaces. And here's the interesting part. They used a contractor named Pemberton Construction. Same family that donated the piano in room B4. Officer Chun flipped through her notes. That's not necessarily significant. Maybe not. But according to these records, the work was supervised by a custodian named Leonard Voss. He worked here for almost 20 years, from 1975 to 1995. Margaret would have known him. They found Margaret in her office, grading theory assignments and trying to reschedule Claire's lessons among the other instructors. When Detective Kowalski mentioned Leonard Voss, her expression grew troubled. Oh, Leonard. Yes, I remember him. He was ... an unusual man. Very dedicated to the building, almost obsessively so. He knew every corner of this place, every hidden space and forgotten room. But he was also... She paused, searching for the right words. He made some of the female students uncomfortable. Never anything overt, but he had a way of appearing suddenly, of knowing things he shouldn't have known. What kind of things? Personal things. He'd know if a student was having problems at home, or if someone was dating someone new. He'd make comments that showed he'd been listening to private conversations. The board asked him to leave in 1995 after several complaints. Detective Kowalski made careful notes. Do you know what happened to him after that? I heard he took a job at the elementary school, then later worked for the city maintenance department. But I lost track of him years ago. Why do you ask? Just trying to understand the building's history. These noises Claire was hearing. Is it possible someone could access the conservatory after hours without setting off alarms? Margaret's face went pale. We don't have a security system, Detective. The building is old, and we never felt we needed one. Bridgeville is a small town. People don't lock their doors here. But Claire had keys? Yes, and so do I, and the janitor, and 2 of the other long-term instructors. But we keep track of them carefully. What about during the 1980s renovations? Could there be access points you're not aware of? Margaret looked deeply uncomfortable. I suppose it's possible. Leonard knew this building better than anyone. If there were hidden spaces, he would have known about them. The investigation took on new urgency. Detective Kowalski requested building blueprints from the city planning office, while Officer Chun began tracking down Leonard Voss's employment records. What they discovered painted a troubling picture. Leonard Voss had been fired from the elementary school in 1998 after being caught in the building after hours without authorization. He'd worked briefly for the city maintenance department before, being terminated in 2001 for similar reasons. After that, his employment history became sporadic odd jobs, part-time work, no fixed address. He was a drifter, Officer Chun told Detective Kowalski as they reviewed the file. But he kept coming back to Bridgeville. According to his arrest record, he was picked up for trespassing 3 times between 2002 and 2005. Twice at the old mill, once at the abandoned Grange Hall. Always public buildings. Always places where he could potentially find shelter or hide out. And Detective look at this. She handed him a police report from 2003. He was questioned in connection with the disappearance of Maria Santos, a 24-year-old who vanished after leaving work at the bank. Case was never solved. Detective Kowalski studied the report. Maria Santos had disappeared on a Thursday evening in March 2003, leaving her car parked outside the bank where she worked as a teller. Like Claire, she'd vanished without a trace, leaving behind no signs of struggle or obvious motive for disappearing voluntarily. Were there other missing women? Officer Chun pulled out a thicker folder. I've been looking into that. Over the past 10 years, 3 women have disappeared from Bridgeville and the surrounding area. All between the ages of 22 and 31. All left behind cars and personal belongings. All vanished without explanation. The names were written in Officer Chun's neat handwriting. Maria Santos, 2003. Rebecca Lawson, 2004. Janet Pike, 2006. And now Claire Hensley, 2007. 4 women in 4 years, Detective Kowalski said grimly. That's not a coincidence. No, it's not. And Detective? I checked Leonard Voss's known addresses during those years. He was living in a trailer park about 2 miles from where Maria Santos worked. He had a job at the maintenance company that serviced the office building where Rebecca Lawson disappeared. Janet Pike vanished from the parking lot of a restaurant where Voss had been employed as a dishwasher the month before. The pattern was becoming clear, but proving it would be another matter entirely. Leonard Voss had been careful, had never stayed in one place long enough to attract sustained attention. And without bodies, without crime scenes, there was no physical evidence to connect him to the disappearances. We need to find him, Detective Kowalski said. And we need to search that conservatory from top to bottom. The search began at dawn the next morning. Detective Kowalski had requested assistance from the state police, and a team of 6 officers armed with crowbars, flashlights, and building schematics began a systematic examination of the conservatory. They started in the basement, moving aside decades of accumulated storage to examine the foundation walls. Officer Chun supervised the search of the main floor, paying particular attention to the practice rooms and their soundproofing. In room B4, she ran her hands along the paneling behind the piano, feeling for loose boards or hidden latches. The wood here is definitely newer, she told Detective Kowalski. And look at this. She pointed to a section of baseboard that didn't quite align with the rest of the wall. Someone's been moving this recently. They pried away the baseboard to reveal a narrow gap between the wall and the floor. Detective Kowalski shined his flashlight into the space and saw something that made his blood run cold scratches in the wood, as if someone had been clawing at it from inside. We need to open this wall, he said. It took 2 hours to carefully remove the soundproofing panels without damaging potential evidence. Behind the false wall, they discovered a space approximately 4 feet wide and 8 feet deep, large enough for a person to stand in, but too narrow to lie down comfortably. The space was empty, except for a few items that made Detective Kowalski's stomach turn. A stained sleeping bag, several empty water bottles, and a small notebook filled with handwritten observations. Officer Chun opened the notebook carefully, using latex gloves to avoid contaminating evidence. The handwriting was small and precise, filled with dates and times and detailed descriptions of the conservatory's daily routines. Tuesday, October 2nd, she read aloud. Claire stays late again. Practices Chopin until 8:30. Talks to herself while she plays. Says she knows someone is listening. Thursday, October 4th. Claire brings coffee in blue mug. Leaves it on windowsill. Keeps looking toward the wall during Emma's lesson. Getting suspicious. Monday, October 8th. Claire calls piano tuner. Asks about back panel. Too close. Need to be more careful. The final entry was dated October 15th, the day before Claire's disappearance. She knows. Called her brother. Tomorrow she'll tell someone. Can't let that happen. Detective Kowalski radioed for the crime scene unit while Officer Chun continued. Searching the hidden space. In the far corner, partially hidden beneath the sleeping bag, she found a small pile of items that made her call out in shock. Detective, you need to see this. The items were personal effects, a silver earring, a red silk scarf, a leather wallet with the initials M.S. embossed on the front, and a small gold locket containing a photo of a young woman with dark hair. Maria. Santos, Detective Kowalski said grimly, recognizing the face from the missing person files. He kept trophies. But there was something else in the corner that chilled them both. A silver bracelet with delicate engraving that read, "Always find your way." Officer Chun had seen Adam Hensley describe this exact bracelet to the police artist just 2 days earlier. Claire's bracelet, she whispered. But if it's here, where is she? The crime scene unit arrived within an hour, led by Detective Patricia Morales, a veteran investigator with 20 years of experience in homicide cases. She supervised the careful documentation and removal of evidence from the hidden space. Wow. Detective Kowalski coordinated with the state police to issue an APB for Leonard Voss. Based on the evidence we've recovered, Detective Morales told the assembled officers, we're now treating this as a homicide investigation. Leonard Voss is our primary suspect in the disappearances of Claire Hensley and potentially 3 other women. But we still don't have bodies, Officer Chun pointed out. No, but we have enough evidence to arrest him on kidnapping charges. And once we have him in custody, we can work on getting him to tell us where he's taken them. The search for Leonard Voss intensified over the following days. His last known address was a condemned trailer on the outskirts of town. But when police arrived, they found it empty, except for more disturbing evidence newspaper clippings about the missing women, detailed maps of Bridgeville and the surrounding area, and a collection of photographs taken from inside the conservatory. The photographs showed the interior of practice room, B-4 from impossible angle shots that could only have been taken from inside the hidden space behind the wall. Some showed Claire at the piano, unaware she was being watched. Others showed her students, young women and girls, who had no idea they were being observed by a predator. He's been watching them for months, Detective Morales said, studying the photographs, maybe years. This wasn't random. He was selecting targets, studying their routines, waiting for the right moment. But where is he now? Detective Kowalski asked. And more importantly, where are the women he took? The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the piano tuner, called the police station on Friday morning with information. She'd remembered about her last conversation with Claire. I've been thinking about what Claire said when I was working on the piano, she told Officer Chun. She mentioned that the strange noises seemed to be coming from below the room, not from inside the instrument. She wondered if there might be a basement space under the practice rooms. Officer Chun pulled out the building blueprints they'd obtained from the city planning office. According to these, there's no basement under that section of the building. That's what I thought too, but Claire was insistent. She said she'd done some research on the building's history, and she believed there might be spaces that weren't on the official plans. The revelation sent the investigation in a new direction. Detective Kowalski contacted the local historical society, seeking information about the conservatory's original construction and any subsequent modifications. What he learned changed everything. Eleanor Pemberton, the 83-year-old granddaughter of the building's original owner, met him at the Historical Society on Saturday morning. She moved slowly with the aid of a walker, but her mind was sharp, and her memory of the building's history was remarkably detailed. Grandfather built the conservatory in 1923, she told Detective Kowalski as they sat in the Society's cramped research room. But it wasn't originally designed as a music school. It was his private residence, a mansion with dozens of rooms and several unusual features. What kind of unusual features? Hidden passages, secret rooms, even a small tunnel that connected to the carriage house. Grandfather was eccentric. He believed in being prepared for any eventuality, including the need to hide from intruders or escape quickly if necessary. Detective Kowalski felt his pulse quicken. These hidden spaces would. They still exist? Some of them, certainly. When the building was converted to a conservatory in the 1950s, they sealed off many of the residential features, but they didn't eliminate them entirely. Too expensive, and the new owners thought they might be historically significant. Do you have any records of these spaces? Maps or blueprints? Eleanor smiled and opened a leather portfolio she'd brought with her. I have something better. I have Grandfather's original architectural plans, including all the hidden features he had installed. The plans revealed a complex network of passages and concealed rooms throughout the building. Most significantly, they showed a series of basement chambers beneath the practice rooms that were completely separate from the main basement and accessed through a concealed entrance in the building's foundation. This tunnel, Detective Kowalski said, pointing to a passage that seemed to run from the basement chambers to an exit point beyond the building's footprint. Where does it lead? Eleanor studied the plans carefully. To the old carriage house. It was demolished in the 1960s, but the tunnel would still be there. The exit point would be, let me see, approximately 50 yards behind the conservatory, near where the town square parking lot is now. Detective Kowalski radioed for immediate backup and emergency excavation equipment. If Leonard Voss had discovered these hidden chambers, they might finally have found where he'd been keeping his victims. The excavation began at sunset on Saturday, with portable floodlights illuminating the area behind the conservatory. Using ground-penetrating radar, the team located the approximate position of the tunnel entrance and began carefully digging through decades of accumulated soil and debris. At 9:30 p.m., Officer Chun's shovel struck something solid, a concrete slab, partially buried beneath 3 feet of earth. Working together, the team cleared away the soil to reveal a heavy metal door set into the ground, secured with a modern padlock that looked completely out of place among the century-old stonework. This is it, Detective Kowalski said grimly. He's been using the old tunnel system. The lock was cut away with bolt cutters, and Detective Morales led the team down a narrow stone staircase into the underground chamber. The air was stale and heavy, with the smell of mold and dampness. But there was something else, the faint scent of recent human habitation. The tunnel was narrow, but well constructed, with stone walls and a vaulted ceiling that spoke to the craftsmanship of the original builders. Battery-powered lanterns provided the only illumination as the team moved carefully through the passage, following it toward the conservatory. After approximately 40 yards, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber beneath the building. Here, the evidence of Leonard Voss's presence was unmistakable: sleeping bags, canned food, battery-powered radios, and stacks of newspapers and magazines, dating back several years. But there was something else that made Detective Morales' blood run cold. 4 separate areas that had been sectioned off with heavy chains and padlocks, each containing a narrow cot and personal items that clearly belonged to women. He kept them here, she whispered. He brought them down here and kept them prisoner. The team searched each sectioned area carefully, documenting evidence and looking for any sign of the missing women. In the area that appeared to be the most recently used, they found items that belonged to Claire, her lesson planning book, a spare set of car keys, and a small framed photograph of her and Adam from their college graduation. But Claire herself was nowhere to be found. "There's another passage," Officer Chun called out from the far end of the chamber. "It keeps going deeper into the ground." The secondary tunnel was even narrower than the first, barely wide enough for a single person to navigate. It sloped downward at a sharp angle, disappearing into darkness that seemed to swallow their flashlight beams. Detective Kowalski made the decision to explore the passage himself, despite the obvious dangers. The tunnel continued for what felt like an eternity, twisting and turning through the underground geology of the area. The walls changed from dressed stone to rough-hewn rock, suggesting this portion of the system might be much older than the rest. Finally, the tunnel opened into a natural cave system that extended far beyond the reach of his flashlight. A sound of running water echoed from somewhere in the darkness, and the air carried the mineral scent of an underground stream. "We need spelunking equipment," he radioed back to the surface, "and we need it fast." The cave rescue team arrived at dawn on Sunday, equipped with professional caving gear and underwater recovery equipment. What they found in the cave system beneath Bridgeville would haunt the investigators for years to come. The caves were extensive, with multiple chambers and passages carved by centuries of water flow. In the deepest accessible chamber, they discovered evidence of Leonard Voss's long-term habitation, a sophisticated camp complete with sleeping areas, food storage, and even a primitive workshop where he appeared to have been crafting restraints and other tools. But it was in a side chamber, partially flooded by the underground stream, that they made the discovery that would finally bring closure to the families of the missing women. 4 bodies, preserved by the cold water and stable cave environment, were found in what appeared to be a natural pool. The victims had been weighed down with stones and chains, hidden in the deepest part of the cave system, where they might never have been found. Claire Hensley was among them. The medical examiner's preliminary findings suggested that the women had been kept alive for varying periods of time before being killed. The cause of death appeared to be drowning, though full autopsies would be needed to determine the exact circumstances. He kept them prisoner in the chambers. Detective Morales explained to the gathered media at a press conference held Monday morning. "We believe he would bring them food and water, keeping them alive for days or possibly weeks, before ultimately killing them and disposing of their bodies in the cave system." The manhunt for Leonard Voss continued, but the investigators were now dealing with a crime scene that spanned multiple jurisdictions and required expertise from geologists, forensic anthropologists, and water recovery specialists. The cave system was vast, with passages that extended for miles through the underground rock formations. It was Adam Hensley who provided the break in the case that finally led to Voss's capture. While reviewing Claire's personal effects that had been recovered from the hidden chambers, he noticed something that the investigators had missed. "This isn't hers," he told Detective Kowalski, holding up a small key that had been found with Claire's belongings. "I've never seen this before, and it doesn't match any of the locks in her apartment or car." The key was unusual brass, with an intricate pattern that suggested it might be for a specialty lock or security box. Detective Kowalski had it photographed and sent to locksmiths throughout the region, hoping someone might recognize the design. The answer came from an unexpected source. Frank Morrison, a locksmith who'd been working in Bridgeville for 40 years, recognized the key immediately. "That's a key to one of the old safe deposit boxes at First National Bank," he told Detective Kowalski. "They used those particular locks from about 1975 to 1985, before they upgraded to the electronic systems. I've repaired dozens of them over the years. The bank's records showed that safe deposit box 247 had been rented continuously since 1983 by a customer named L. Voss. The monthly rental fees had been paid automatically through a checking account that was still active. He's been planning this for decades, Detective Morales said as they prepared to execute a search warrant for the safe deposit box. This wasn't opportunistic. It was systematic, carefully orchestrated. The contents of the safe deposit box painted a chilling picture of Leonard Voss's long-term obsession with the women of Bridgeville. Inside were hundreds of photographs, detailed written observations, maps of the town with specific locations marked, and what appeared to be a carefully maintained journal documenting his activities over more than 20 years. The journal entries revealed the mind of a predator who had been stalking potential victims for years before finally acting on his impulses. He had detailed information about dozens of women, their daily routines, their relationships, their vulnerabilities. Many of the women were still alive, unaware that they had been targeted and studied by a killer. But it was the final entry, the journal that provided the clue investigators needed to finally locate Leonard Voss. Plan B activated, the entry read. Primary location compromised. Moving to secondary shelter. Will lay low until attention dies down. Cache location remains secure. The journal contained references to multiple cache locations throughout the Yell. Area places where Voss had apparently hidden supplies and equipment in preparation for the possibility that his underground operation might be discovered. Most were described in cryptic terms, but one entry was more specific. Old mill location ideal for long-term concealment. Water access, multiple escape routes, minimal law enforcement presence. Supplies cached in turbine room. Sublevel 3. Old mill had been abandoned for more than a decade. Its machinery rusted, and its buildings slowly being reclaimed by the forest. Located about 5 miles outside of Bridgeville, it had been a minor tourist attraction until economic changes made it unprofitable to maintain. Detective Kowalski coordinated with the state police to surround the mill complex before dawn on Tuesday morning. They approached carefully, aware that Voss might be armed and would certainly be desperate. The mill was a massive structure, 4 stories tall with a complex network of water channels and turbine rooms that had once powered the grain processing equipment. Many of the floors were unstable, and the building was considered unsafe for casual exploration. Sublevel 3 turned out to be a maintenance area beneath the main turbine room, accessible through a series of narrow catwalks and ladders. The space was dark and humid, filled with the sound of water flowing through the mill's channel system. They found Leonard Voss huddled in a corner of the sublevel, surrounded by supplies he'd apparently been accumulating for years. At 62, he was smaller than the investigators had expected, almost frail-looking, but his eyes held the cold intelligence of a predator who had evaded capture for decades. Leonard Voss, Detective Kowalski called out, his weapon drawn. You're under arrest for the murders of Claire Hensley, Maria Santos, Rebecca Lawson, and Janet Pike. Voss didn't resist arrest, but he also didn't speak. He was processed and transported to the county jail in complete silence, his expression blank and emotionless. The investigation continued for several more weeks as forensic specialists processed the enormous amount of evidence recovered from the cave system, the conservatory, and Voss's various hiding places. The journal entries alone provided enough material for criminal charges that would ensure he never saw freedom again. But for Adam Hensley, the arrest and criminal charges were only the beginning of a long journey towards something that might eventually resemble closure. The sister he had loved and protected since childhood was gone, and no amount of justice could bring her back. The funeral was held on a crisp autumn day in November, with the entire town of Bridgeville turning out to pay their respects to Claire and the other victims. The conservatory remained closed, its practice room silent, while the community struggled to come to terms with the horror that had been hidden beneath their feet for so many years. Adam stood at the graveside, holding the silver bracelet that had been found in Leonard Voss's hidden chamber. "Always find your way," he read aloud, his voice breaking. "You did, Claire. You found your way home." The bracelet was buried with her, along with the blue coffee mug she had used every morning and the sheet music for the Chopin Nocturne she had been preparing for the fall recital that would never happen. Leonard Voss was convicted on 4 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He never confessed to the crimes, never showed remorse, and never revealed whether there were other victims who had not yet been discovered. The conservatory building was sold to the city and eventually demolished, its dark secrets buried beneath a new community park. The hidden chambers and tunnel system were filled with concrete, sealed forever against the possibility that they might claim more victims. But the impact of the crimes extended far beyond the immediate victims and their families. The town of Bridgeville was forever changed by the knowledge that evil had been living among them, hiding in plain sight, preying on their daughters and sisters while they went about their daily lives in blissful ignorance. That Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the piano tuner, never worked in another conservatory. She moved to California and took a job tuning pianos for a recording studio, but she never forgot the sound of Claire's voice, asking about the noises in the walls. Margaret Thornfield retired from music education and spent her remaining years volunteering at a domestic violence shelter, helping women who had survived predators and abuse. She never stopped feeling guilty about dismissing Claire's concerns about the strange noises in the building. Timothy Crane, the 17-year-old who had been preparing for college auditions, abandoned his plans to study music and became a police officer instead. He joined the Missing Persons Unit of the Portland Police Department, dedicating his career to finding people who had vanished without a trace. Officer Sarah Chun was promoted to detective and specialized in cold cases involving missing women. She developed new protocols for investigating disappearances that took into account the possibility of long-term captivity and hidden crime scenes. Her work on the Bridgeville case became a model for law enforcement agencies across the country. Detective Ray Kowalski retired 2 years after the case was closed, but not before establishing a task force dedicated to investigating historical missing persons cases in small towns throughout Oregon. The task force discovered 3 additional cases that showed similarities to Leonard Voss's methods, though they were never able to definitively connect him to those crimes. The psychological impact of the case rippled through the community for years. Parents became more protective of their children. Women were more cautious about being alone, and the town's sense of security was permanently shattered. Grief counselors were brought in to help residents process the trauma of learning that theirs quiet community had been the hunting ground for a serial killer. But perhaps the most lasting impact was on the families of the victims. Carmen Rodriguez, Emma's mother, became an advocate for missing persons cases, working with families across the state to navigate the complex emotions and practical challenges of having a loved one disappear. She established a foundation in Claire's name that provided support services for families of missing persons. "Claire taught my daughter that music was about telling stories," Carmen said at the foundation's first fundraising event. "Her story doesn't end with her death. It continues through the lives she touched and the changes her case brought about." The foundation's work extended beyond emotional support to practical assistance, helping families navigate the legal system, coordinating with law enforcement, and providing financial assistance for private investigators and search efforts. They also work to improve missing persons protocols, advocating for faster response times and more thorough investigations. Adam Hensley became the foundation's first board president, channeling his grief into action that might prevent other families from experiencing the same loss. He returned to school, earning a degree in criminal justice, and eventually became a victim's advocate working with the district attorney's office. "I couldn't save Claire," he told a group of law enforcement officials at a conference on missing persons cases. "But maybe I can help save someone else's sister." The case also led to significant changes in how law enforcement agencies approached missing persons investigations. The discovery of Leonard Voss's extensive preparation and long-term planning challenged the assumption that most disappearances were either voluntary or the result of random crimes. Detective Patricia Morales, who had led the crime scene investigation, developed new training protocols that emphasized the importance of thoroughly investigating buildings and properties associated with missing persons cases. Her work led to the discovery of several other hidden spaces where predators had been operating undetected. "We learned that evil is often patient," she explained to a gathering of investigators. "It plans, it prepares, and it hides in places we never think to look. We have to be smarter, more thorough, and more willing to believe that the impossible might be possible." The Bridgeville case became a touchstone for discussions about community safety and the responsibility of institutions to protect vulnerable people. The conservatory's board of directors had been sued by the victims' families, and the case highlighted the need for better security measures and background checks for employees with access to buildings where people might be isolated. Margaret Thornfield, despite her retirement, continued to struggle with guilt over her failure to take Claire's concerns seriously. She underwent therapy to help process her feelings of responsibility and eventually began speaking at conferences about the importance of listening to people who report feeling unsafe or uncomfortable. "I thought I knew Claire," she told a group of educators. "I thought I understood her concerns. But I was looking at everything through the lens of what I expected to see, not what was actually happening. We have to train ourselves to listen more carefully, to take concerns seriously, even when they seem unrealistic." The physical evidence recovered from the case filled several storage rooms and provided forensic investigators with a wealth of information about Leonard Voss's methods and psychological profile. Dr. Amanda Foster, a forensic psychologist who studied the case extensively, published a detailed analysis that became required reading for law enforcement training programs. "Voss represents a particularly dangerous type of predator," Dr. Foster wrote. "He was highly organized, patient, and capable of maintaining a facade of normalcy while carrying out systematic stalking and murder. His ability to create and maintain hidden spaces for extended periods suggests a level of planning that most investigators are not prepared to encounter." The journal entries and photographs recovered from Voss's safe deposit box revealed the extent of his surveillance network. He had been watching dozens of women over the course of more than 20 years, documenting their routines, relationships, and vulnerabilities with meticulous detail. Some of the women identified in his journals were contacted by investigators and warned about their inclusion in his surveillance activities. Many reported feeling violated and frightened by the knowledge that they had been watched and studied without their knowledge. Jessica Martinez, a bank teller who had been extensively documented in Voss's journals, moved to another state after learning about her inclusion in his surveillance network. "I keep thinking about all the times I felt like someone was watching me," she told investigators. "I used to dismiss it as paranoia, but now I know it was real. He was there, in the shadows, planning God knows what." The case also revealed the limitations of small-town law enforcement resources. Bridgeville's police department consisted of just 4 officers, none of whom had extensive experience with major crimes. The state police had to provide significant assistance throughout the investigation, highlighting the need for better coordination between local and state agencies. Police Chief Robert Sullivan, who had been with the Bridgeville Department for 15 years, acknowledged the department's limitations in handling such a complex case. "We're trained to deal with traffic violations, domestic disputes, and the occasional burglary, he said. None of us were prepared for something like this. The case led to increased funding for small-town police departments and better training, programs for officers in rural areas. It also resulted in the creation of regional task forces that could respond quickly to major crimes in communities that lacked the resources to handle them independently. The technological aspects of the investigation also broke new ground. The cave system where the bodies were found required specialized equipment and techniques that had never been used in a criminal investigation in Oregon. The state police worked with university researchers and private contractors to develop new methods for searching and documenting underground crime scenes. Dr. Robert Chon, a geologist who assisted with the cave investigation, noted that the case demonstrated the importance of understanding local geology and hydrology in criminal investigations. Leonard Voss chose his hiding places based on a sophisticated understanding of the underground environment. He explained, he knew how water flow patterns would preserve or destroy evidence, and he used that knowledge to his advantage. The cave system itself was eventually sealed and declared off-limits to the public, but not before a complete survey was conducted to ensure that no additional evidence or victims remained hidden in its depths. The survey revealed that the cave system extended for more than 3 miles underground, with dozens of chambers and passages that had never been explored. The discovery of such an extensive underground network beneath a small town raised questions about what other secrets might be hidden in similar locations across the country. The case prompted geological surveys in other areas where missing persons cases remained unsolved, though no additional discoveries were made. Leonard Voss's trial began 18 months after his arrest, and the proceedings were closely watched by law enforcement officials, legal experts, and the media. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Michael Thompson, presented overwhelming evidence of Voss's guilt, including DNA evidence, the personal effects found in his possession, and the detailed journal entries documenting his crimes. Voss's defense attorney, Patricia Williams, argued that her client was mentally ill and had been driven to his crimes by years of social isolation and psychological trauma. She presented evidence of Voss's troubled childhood, his history of mental health issues, and his inability to form normal relationships with other people. Leonard Voss is a sick man who needs treatment, not punishment, Williams argued. His crimes are the result of a diseased mind, not evil intent. The prosecution countered that Voss's meticulous planning and careful execution of his crimes demonstrated clear intent and awareness of right and wrong. This was not the work of a mentally ill person acting on impulse, Thompson argued. This was the calculated behavior of a predator who knew exactly what he was doing. The trial lasted 3 weeks, with testimony from more than 40 witnesses, including survivors of Voss's surveillance, law enforcement officials, forensic experts, and mental health professionals. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Before returning guilty verdicts on all counts, Judge Patricia Morrison sentenced Voss to 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he would never be released from prison. In delivering the sentence, she addressed the defendant directly for the first time during the proceedings. Leonard Voss, you have committed crimes that strike at the very heart of what it means to be human, she said. You have taken away the lives of 4 innocent women, destroyed their families, and traumatized an entire community. You have shown no remorse, no recognition of the pain you have caused, and no indication that you understand the magnitude of your crimes. Voss remained silent throughout the sentencing, showing no emotion as the judge delivered his fate. He was transported to the Oregon State Penitentiary, where he would spend the remainder of his life in solitary confinement. The years following the trial brought both healing and continued pain for the victims' families. Annual memorial services were held for Claire, Maria, Rebecca, and Janet, bringing together their families and friends to remember their lives and honor their memory. Adam Hensley married his college girlfriend, Sarah, 3 years after Claire's death. Their wedding was held in the same church where Claire's funeral had taken place, and they left an empty chair in the front row in her honor. Their first daughter, born 2 years later, was named Claire in memory of her aunt. "I wanted to make sure her name continued," Adam explained to friends. "Claire's story doesn't end with her death. It continues through the people who remember her and the changes she brought about." The empty conservatory building stood abandoned for 2 years before the city finally decided to demolish it. The demolition drew hundreds of spectators, including many of the families affected by the case. Some came to find closure, others to ensure that the building where so much horror had occurred would never claim another victim. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who had moved to California after the case, returned to Bridgeville for the demolition. "I needed to see it come down," she told a reporter. "I needed to know that those rooms, those hiding places, were gone forever." The demolition took 3 days, with special attention paid to the underground areas where Voss had hidden his victims. The tunnels and chambers were filled with concrete before the building above was brought down, ensuring that the underground network could never be used again. In the years that followed, the empty lot where the conservatory had stood became Memorial Park, dedicated to the victims of violence. 4 trees were planted, one for each of the women who had died, and a small fountain was installed with a plaque bearing their names. The memorial became a place of pilgrimage for families of missing persons from across the country. They came to pay their respects, to find comfort in the knowledge that justice had been served, and to draw strength from the community's determination to prevent such tragedies from happening again. Emma Rodriguez, who had been Claire's youngest student, continued studying piano despite the trauma of her teacher's death. She eventually became a music teacher herself, working with children in underserved communities and carrying forward Claire's belief that music could heal and inspire. "Claire taught me that music tells stories," Emma said at the Memorial Park's dedication ceremony. "Her story is one of tragedy, but also of love and courage, and the power of people to come together when darkness threatens to overwhelm them." The case continued to influence law enforcement practices for years after its resolution. The protocols developed during the investigation became standard procedures for missing persons cases involving potential long-term captivity. The techniques used to search the cave system were refined and applied to other cases across the country. Detective Sarah Chun, who had been promoted after her work on the case, established a national database of missing persons cases that showed similarities to Leonard Voss's methods. The database helped identify patterns and connections that might otherwise have gone unnoticed, leading to the resolution of several cold cases. Claire's case taught us that we can't afford to dismiss any possibility, no matter how unlikely it seems, Detective Chun explained to a gathering of investigators. "We learned that evil can hide in the most unexpected places, and that our job is to look everywhere, no matter how difficult or uncomfortable it might be." The psychological impact of the case extended far beyond the immediate victims and their families. The knowledge that a predator had been operating undetected for so long in such a small, close-knit community challenged fundamental assumptions about safety and security. Dr. Michael Roberts, a trauma specialist who worked with many of the cases survivors, noted that the community's healing process was complicated by feelings of guilt and betrayal. People felt guilty for not seeing the signs, for not protecting the victims, for living their lives normally while this horror was happening beneath their feet, he explained. The healing process was gradual and incomplete. Some residents moved away, unable to feel safe in a place where such evil had flourished. Others stayed and worked to rebuild their sense of community, determined not to let fear control their lives. The case also highlighted the importance of believing people when They report feeling unsafe or uncomfortable. Claire's repeated concerns about noises in the conservatory had been dismissed as stress or imagination, but they had been her attempt to communicate that something was wrong. Margaret Thornfield, the former conservatory director, became an advocate for taking such concerns seriously. She developed training programs for institutions that worked with vulnerable populations, emphasizing the importance of creating safe environments and listening to people's concerns. We have to create cultures where people feel safe reporting their concerns, even when those concerns seem unrealistic, she explained to a group of educators. We have to train ourselves to listen with open minds and to investigate thoroughly, even when we think we know what's happening. The case's impact on the broader law enforcement community was significant and lasting. The investigation techniques developed during the case became standard practice for missing persons investigations, and the case itself became a required study for investigators specializing in such cases. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children used the case as an example of how predators could operate undetected for extended periods, emphasizing the need for vigilance and thorough investigation of all disappearances. The Bridgeville case showed us that we have to be prepared for the possibility that disappearances are connected, that predators can be far more sophisticated than we expect, and that victims might be hidden in places we never think to look, said Dr. Patricia Morrison, the center's director of law enforcement training. The case also influenced architectural and security standards for public buildings, particularly those that served vulnerable populations. New guidelines were developed for background checks, access controls, and regular security assessments to prevent predators from gaining access to potential victims. The conservatory's board of directors, which had been dissolved after the building's demolition, established a foundation dedicated to improving safety standards for music schools and similar institutions. The foundation provided funding for security upgrades, background check programs, and training for staff and volunteers. As the years passed, the immediate shock and horror of the case began to fade, but its impact on the community remained. The annual memorial services continued, drawing smaller crowds, but maintaining their significance for those who had been directly affected by the crimes. Adam Hensley, now in his 40s and a respected victims advocate, continued to work with families of missing persons. His own experience with loss had given him unique insight into the challenges faced by those whose loved ones had vanished without explanation. The not knowing is the hardest part, he told a support group for families of missing persons. When Claire first disappeared, I held on to hope that she was still alive, that she would come home. When we found her body, it was devastating, but it was also a relief to finally know what had happened to her. The case had taught him that closure was not a destination, but a journey, one that required constant effort and support from others who understood the unique pain of losing someone to violence. The children who had been Claire's students are now adults, pursuing their own careers and families. Many had continued with music, carrying forward the lessons she had taught them about finding beauty and meaning in the midst of difficulty. Timothy Crane, who had become a police officer, eventually specialized in missing persons cases and credited his experience with Claire's disappearance for shaping his career path. He had worked on dozens of cases over the years, always remembering the importance of taking every disappearance seriously and investigating thoroughly. Claire's case taught me that every missing person is someone's sister, someone's daughter, someone's friend, he said. They deserve our best efforts, our most thorough investigation, and our commitment to finding the truth, no matter how long it takes. The case had become part of the fabric of Bridgeville's history, a dark chapter that the community had worked to understand and learn from. The memorial park where the conservatory once stood had become a place of reflection and remembrance, where people came to honor the victims and to renew their commitment to protecting the vulnerable. On quiet evenings, when the wind moved through the 4 memorial trees, some people claimed they could hear the faint sound of piano music drifting across the park. Whether it was imagination, memory, or something more, the music served as a reminder that the victims' stories continued, that their lives had meaning beyond their tragic ends. The case of Leonard Voss and his victims had demonstrated both the depths of human evil and the heights of human compassion. It had shown how a community could be shattered by violence and yet find ways to heal and grow stronger. It had revealed the importance of listening to those who felt unsafe and the need for constant vigilance against those who would prey on the vulnerable. Most importantly, it had honored the memory of 4 women whose lives had been cut short by a predator's evil, ensuring that their stories would not be forgotten and that their deaths would lead to changes that might prevent others from suffering the same fate. The bracelet that Adam had buried with his sister, engraved with "Always Find Your Way," had become a symbol of the case's enduring impact. Claire had found her way home, not in life but in death, and her story had found its way into the hearts and minds of countless people who had been touched by her case. The Memorial Park stood as a testament to the community's resilience, to the power of people to come together in the face of tragedy, and to the belief that love and justice could ultimately triumph over evil. In the shadow of the memorial trees, visitors could find peace, remembrance, and hope for a future where such tragedies would be prevented by the vigilance and compassion of communities committed to protecting their most vulnerable members. As the sun set over Bridgeville on another quiet evening, the memorial fountain continued to flow, its gentle sound a reminder that life continued, that healing was possible, and that the memory of those who had been lost would forever inspire efforts to create a safer, more compassionate world.